Welcome everybody to this week's Thinking Thursday, where the guests are Andy Pelley, successful owner, as I think you're all aware, and champion trainer Patrick Janssens. We have various subjects to discuss, despite technical issues at this end. I wanted to crack straight into discussion with Andy relating to the boy behind me. I think most of you recognise as Goldie's Hoddle. Andy, I understand that he's enjoying life in retirement.
Yeah, very much. We retired his brother Goldie's Ginola at exactly the same time, and they've spent their whole lives together. You know, even being in the same kennel at Patrick's all the way through their racing time. So they're very, very close, and we managed to rehome them together. They've gone off with Marcus, who used to work at Patrick's kennel and got to know the brothers very well at his time there and loved the dogs. And when he became aware that they were retiring, put his hand up straight away and said that he'd like to have them. He and his missus, fantastic people. They've already got, I think, 3 retired. So our Dave and Del Boy become their 4th and 5th. And what they've been really good at is sending us pictures of the dogs. So we've been able to see them both settled at home, out on walks, interacting with the other dogs that they've got, and just having the time of their lives, exactly how it should be, exactly what you'd wish for them. So retirement seems to be treating them both very well.
Excellent. And I believe you have a young lady that's waiting to come in season as well.
Yeah, we do. Goldie's Hotspur, very special dog for us, and we retired her in January last year, and we've been waiting for her to have a full season since, and she's due any time now. And so the plan will be to mate her. Not quite sure who with as yet. We've probably got a couple of weeks to make that call. And as you know, it's not quite as easy as it once was to get dogs to and from Ireland. So we may be looking closer to home in terms of mating her, but that'll all sort itself out over the next couple of weeks, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I gather you've got a couple of younger dogs with Patrick as well.
Yeah, so I do have 2 younger dogs with Patrick at the moment that are just starting out their racing careers. They're racing as Goldie's Perryman and Goldie's Mabbott. Goldie's Mabbott is a bitch from Liam Dowling's setup. She started her life as Ballymac Fergie, and she is a July 19, and she's been out of season a few weeks, so she's just started trialling in, and she's on the card at Toaster in an A4 Thursday, tomorrow. And we have Goldie's Perryman, who is a distant dog. He's younger, he's in October. And he had one sprint race at Toaster where unfortunately got knocked over, but fortunately he didn't suffer any ill effects from that fall. So Patrick's brought him back slowly and trialled him and made sure he's okay and had him checked over regularly and so on. And he's back on the card in a 4-bend race again tomorrow.
Excellent stuff. Because in the meantime, Patrick, you're absolutely flying. The kennel remains on top of the Trainers' Championship, and Thorn Falcon and Jewel of Madonna winning last night, with Jack's Solution also in the Maiden Derby. You've got some more coming through, but I mean, exciting crop of young dogs at the moment.
Yeah, we do. We've got a lot of new dogs. You know, we retired like the likes of Desperado, Dan, Goldie's Hoddle, Goldie's Ginola, Sea Lost Tiger. They're all rehomed. So we have a lot of new dogs in. A lot of them are young, like Goldie's Mabbott and Goldie's Perryman, Night Stars. They're all trialing on really, and they're all supposed to be good. I think they're good. But time will tell, you know. But the first signs are very good.
Excellent, and you've had Bocco's Belly back, and I think he's amongst those that you're trying on Thursday, isn't he?
Yeah, Bocco's Belly, Bocco's Melody picked up a bit of an injury. Bocco's Belly went to Ireland for the big race at Limerick, where he got knocked out in the 2nd round. But no, he's all good, and he'll be trialling Thursday, and then we'll probably give him another sprint trial, and then a 500, and then he'll be going for the Derby. Another new one in there's Ballymac Captain. He won his last 3 at Shelbourne Park. His last run was 28-20. Beat a good field there. We pushed him between the lads. We own a dog in Australia between the 10 of us, and we all chipped in and bought this dog, and to have a crack at the Derby. It'll be called Aussie's Captain. That's what it'll be called.
The other thing, you and I speak quite often, and I know one of your big frustrations in recent weeks has been finding difficulty getting races for dogs. What exactly is the problem? Why are you struggling?
The problem is, the most of the problem is as well, some tracks, when they have enough graded dogs, they don't want to know open racing. You know, the only really, when you do open racing, then one-off opens, you have to do them every week, or don't bother really, because your dogs have to get used to these tracks. You know, when you go to Romford every week, like Goldie Shuttle in the back there, the first time I took him there, he done 25.10. So, and you think, well, you know, I took the first time Desperado then, he done 24.80. So, but the more they go round, the better they get used to it. But if they don't do them every week, you can't get used to it, because it's no good going trialing every week. They have to get used to it in the maidens and the winner of ones and then the maidens tires and work their way up that way. You know, that's how Pelley's blue-eyed boy. He only was an average A1 dog at Central Park, and because we kept him week in, week out, back to Romford and back to Romford and back to Romford, and then he finished second behind Desperado Dan, and then Desperado Dan retired and he won the final. So, and now we went back to Central Park and he looked very impressive last week over 500 metres. But if, say for the likes like Perry Bard, and I appreciate they do opens, you know, don't get me wrong, but it's once a month. Well, there's no good to us, because by the time you trial a dog there, he runs there once, and then you have to wait another 3 weeks to run him there again. That's all right for locals, but you know, if I was there, probably locally, I still enter dogs. But for us to go there and trial dogs, they have to do them every week, and then you can take the same dogs back with you. And while you're there running with them dogs, you can trial some others for the following week. And that's how we used to do it at Hove as well, when they used to have their Thursday evening opens. And I had loads of dogs there. I won loads of things at Hove, like, you know, your Bocos Alphas, your Goldie Hotspur, Slick Strauss. You know, they all done well there. But and that's why Romford, on one hand, is so good, you know, because at least they do them every week, and you can go there. And there's a lot of dogs like Goldie, Hotspur, Desperado, their market, loads of them. You know, they sort of become them track specialists there. And you know, like Bocos John Joe, I took him to the Maiden Derby at Henlow last year. Oh, he looked terrible, you know. And then took him to Romford, and he went from strength to strength to strength. But the more you run him there, the better he got.
Yeah,
and that's what you need. If you do open racing, that's what you need. You know, we need. It's the same when you have a graded dog who goes through the grades. It's no different from an open race dog, you know, because most of these dogs, you know, they come here and they need to settle, and they go a bit of form, and they have to come back into form, and that's why you need to run them week in, week out.
very much. Andy, I mean, you're the guy that's you're one of the guys that's financing this. You know, you're buying the open racers, you're plowing your money in. It must get very frustrating when Patrick phones you and says, "I'm sorry, we entered and we didn't get a run."
Yeah, that is very frustrating, and I think it's clear when kennel strengths are up, graded racing comes to the fore, and the opens disappear. And when kennel strength is down and opens are needed, then opens get put on the card in some instances at some tracks, and that is frustrating, because one of the things, you know, I've always found Patrick to be very good at is setting a dog out on a path, on a course, to say, okay, this is where we are. This is where we're going, so we're going to go here, then we're going to go there, and if those races don't fill, as in a track doesn't want to put them on, then all the plans are up in the air. So you've laid a dog out for something, and it just doesn't happen because those opens don't fill. And Patrick's alluded to saying, well, it would be good if tracks did the opens every week. There are tracks that do the opens every week, but they only put on 3 or 4 opens. So if that track is some distance away, it's very hard to justify entering, because you might get 1 or 2 dogs on, and then you've got to justify the cost of going up for you know, taking the van, taking a member of staff out of the kennel for a long period of time to get 1 or 2 dogs on the card. It just doesn't really make economical sense, and I know it's been pretty well documented, but it's when you look at things like, you know, open race competitions where you're running for £3,000 at the other end of the country, it's very difficult to justify the cost. If you want to go for 1 trial and then you've got 3 rounds and you're lucky enough to make the final, unless you win the final, you've lost money. And people's comeback when I say that to them is, well, it's your hobby, it is going to cost you money. Well, look, of course it's a hobby, and of course it's going to cost money, no argument. But there are levels, and there's plenty of people in the sport that do very nicely out of it, and there's plenty of people that struggle, that don't need to. And I think there's probably overall within the sport, there's enough money to go around that we can do better than £3,000 as a first prize, whether we're in COVID or we're not.
Yeah, and I was chatting to David Mitchell, and as we've gone over lots of ground about the Grand Prix at Sunderland worth £3,000, and hopefully there've been lessons learned there. But of course, he was also, and David was also given the perspective of Jim Daly, who has to release a member of the kennel staff for a long journey. Each way for, as you say, three runs plus a trial day, and when the prize money is so derisory, how can even the trainer want to compete? No matter how enthusiastic he may be, why would he want to lose a valued member of staff? Because they're not exactly overflowing with spare staff in kennels. It must be very difficult to do. Now, admittedly, if you're running for £15,000 and good also run money, you can perhaps justify doing it and saying, well, at least somebody's wages have been paid. But moving on, Patrick, I wanted to ask you specifically. We're within a few hours of quite an interesting situation relating to the Northern Flat and withdrawal of David Mullins withdrawing the Antipose favourite 10-pin. After he found himself drawn inside a Rab McNair runner that had previously been a middle, and Rab had decided to seed as rails. I guess Rab's view was that, if I can get 3 or 4, that's exactly what my dog needs. David has a dog very much like in the Bocco's Doomy mould, who absolutely wants the inside. We were talking about it previously, and I think we agreed that pretty much each trainer is in an impossible position in trying to do what's right for their own dog.
It is, and it's very difficult from both point of views, really, because obviously Rab's dog went left, and then he was a middle seat to see them rails. He's got his perfect box, really, trap free. Yeah, so 10-pin is in the wrong box. He wants to be in trap 1. He's like Bocco's Doomy. If they don't change really these seedings, you got rails to middle to rails, and I think that is the only solution, because then you don't get this issue. The thing is, I had it before with Bocco's Belly. He was middle, and I thought he wanted to be rails. He ran a toast in the Puppy Derby. He was middle every time, trap 6. Got pushed out wide, never no good. I went to Monmouth for the Puppy Derby. And I spoke to Tony before that. I says, I think this dog wants to be rails. I tried him from trap 2, and his comments were rails. So I entered him in a trial stake. I see them rails. And Tony said, are you sure? I says, I'm telling you, he won't move off, I promise you. And I says, have a look at him, and if he moves off, we see them back middle. And he was perfectly fine, But I think you have to speak to the racing man. But then on the other end, like David, he's very concerned for his dog, for his draw, because he'll go sharp left and he could get injured, And is it Rab's fault? I don't think it's Rab's fault, because he tried to do the best for his dog. And I think David has tried to do the best for his dog. But with these trap draws, and everybody has this suspicion because they don't do them live, they think this is a setup job. That's how people think, isn't it? If Boothby don't get trapped, if he gets trapped 1 at Toast, they put him in because it's a Savannah dog, and that's how people think, and that's how the world is, and I think, sometimes the GBGB, I think on that hand, they did it for a while, do these live trap draws. I think they should do that more often. I read it can't be that hard to put the phone there while you do the trap draw. It can't be that hard. I'm surely you don't need an extra member of staff for that or nothing, and just do it on YouTube or something like that, and then people can look at it. But if they don't change this, you'll see, like Bocco's Doomy was double rails, 10-pin is double rails, Bocco's John Joe's double rails. If Bocco's John Joe would have been in that Northern Sprint final in trap 4, would he won? Probably not. And that's the way them dogs are. They're very quick, but all they want to do is get over to the rails, and you can't change them. And I think David done the best thing for the dog. I really do.
So how would you feel about the argument? And I brought it up before, and I will continue to bring it up because I think it needs to be discussed, and people make their minds up. If you had a dog who was a middle seed, and you decided that you wanted that dog to be tried on the rail, should a racing office have the entitlement to say, I'm sorry, Patrick, before you get a rail seed for that dog needs to trial and show it's a railer?
Yeah, I think so. I really do. And I think that's what I done with Buckle's Belly at Monmouth Green. And the racing manager agreed with me, you know. And I had before issues with dogs. When I had Buckle's Alfie, in the end, I said to the racing manager, when they asked for the seeding, you see them by your like, I don't know. Yeah, do you know what I mean? And in the end, we all agreed he was rails, you know. And at the end of the day, you can't change the dog where he runs. You can't change that. You know, they run where they want to run. And most dogs, once they're in front, run middle anyway. There is only a handful of dogs who stay really tight on them rails. Yeah. You know, most dogs, when they chase that hare, they run in the middle of the track. But once you put a dog on the outside and he don't move off, he's rails. Yeah. You know, and I think, you know, is Rab's dog like that? I don't know. I don't know the dog that well. You know, I never watched him that closely, but I can see the concern from David. And I think the derby is so close. He's a live contender to win it or to do well in it, you know, and he'll need a lot of luck with the draw. But at the end of the day, you know, he's only tried to do the best for his dog. And so does Rab, you know, but if the GB should do double rails or whatever you want to call it, and you'd have rails to middle and middle to rails, you know, because it's like Jack Solutions last night at you know, he running graded races at Toaster from trap 2 and trap 3 and this and that. And last night, I see them rails, he drew trap 1 and he moved off at the bend. Not bad, but he finished last in the end. But if he would have been, next time we're going to try to see the middle, because will he come away better? Will he do better? You know, but he don't want to be in 6. Do you know what I'm saying? He wants to be in 3 or 4.
I'll throw something out there. You know, I mean, you said you've had all kinds of problems yourself. But if you are amongst the trainers, and this is a consensus of amongst trainers to say, do you know what, I will sign up, because you trial dogs anyway. For your own sake, you want your dogs to trial before you just throw them in. If that was to be agreed by the trainers as a group, and I don't know how we monitor it, but let's say it's generally considered to be, at that point, this needs to go in front of GBGB, even if it's for a trial, even if it's for a trial at one of the tracks who's prepared to do it. But what we don't need is for the GBGB or people within the GBGB to go, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to take 5 years like we did to get the disqualification rule changed. This should be done straight away with them being told what the trainers want and saying, give us the opportunity. If we're wrong and it doesn't work, then okay, we maybe have to go back and think again. I mean, the bottom line is there will always be problems. Because as when we were talking previously, I said, if there were more wide runners born, life would be a lot easier, because you wouldn't have middle runners get in trap 5 and trap 6. They'd all get traps 3s and 4, or roughly, and that's the way the game's always been. So you would get many more dogs in 1 and 2 that want to be in 1 and 2, because the genuine middle seeds are confident of getting their boxes. But I do think it needs to be done, and hopefully we can get a little bit of a momentum going to say to GBGB, we want this tried, and we don't want to wait 5 years for you to be bothered to agree to give us our option to try it, because it is a welfare issue.
It is, and listen, it's not hard to do, really, is it? You know, it's just what his comments are, and go from there. You know, and they can, you know, dogs like Tempin, Bocos, Doomies, your what's the other dog? Bocos, John Joes. They are absolute tight railers. That's what they are. You know, and there's more dogs out there that probably don't mention and everything, but then you have certain dogs who are always definitely wide, you know, and you just got to do the best for the dogs, because that's when you get the cleanest racing, you get less injuries, you get less bad publicity, because them antis, they don't love nothing more than a dog rolling at the first bend, you know what I mean? So, and put it all over the place, and most of the times it's because dogs are in the wrong traps. And you're always going to have dogs in the, not always, but you're going to have dogs in the wrong traps, because that's what competitions are about. And draws win races and things like that. But you can help to reduce it
very much
by doing that.
Very much so. I mean, one of the things that irritates me, I mean, Australian racing is fantastic in so many ways. I do, though, makes me smile when you see dogs regularly strung out over 30 or 40 lengths because of the way they all funnel in with 8-dog racing, all funnel into a space that there is no seeding, that they're badly drawn. It is accepted. They accept it as part of their racing. We used to accept it as part of our racing. People knew dogs got injured, and it was kind of acceptable at the time, but it isn't anymore. So bearing in mind, I'm trying to try and string this together. This is an ideal opportunity to bring Mr. Pelley back into the discussion to say, clearly, if this subject needs to go to the board to say, let's have an experiment. Let's, if necessary, enforce a rule on trainers to say they have to trial dogs to change their seeding. Let's look at the possibility of this sort of rails middle scenario. See whether it works. That we like. As in football, they don't just introduce it to the Premier League. They try it in other leagues first. Clearly a job for GBGB, and I believe there'll soon be a seat as an owner's representative on GBGB, Mr. Pelley. Would you consider it?
Truthfully, no. A couple of people have asked me if I'd do it, and I think if the setup was different, then it's something that I would consider, and it's something that I would enjoy doing, and I think I could add something. But being truthful with you, I think that it feels to me from the outside looking in, it's a bit of a closed shop, and I don't think I'd be able to affect change, and I think change is needed. And some people say, you know, if you're not moving forwards and you're standing still, you're actually really going backwards. And I'm very much one that would want to see things change for the better and move forward. I don't think I could do that in the way the setup is currently, and so I think I would get frustrated very quickly in terms of not making a difference. I think there'd be a weight of expectation, quite rightly, from owners that they would expect to see some positive change, and I think my hands would be tied behind my back and I wouldn't be able to make positive change, and therefore I wouldn't be doing anything worth doing. So I think I would be a waste of time, truthfully.
It's interesting that you say that, because we've had discussions in the past. Now, you have a very solid business background, which, you know, I'm not asking for your CV, but certainly, would you just sort of remind us of the kind of things that you've been involved in the past?
Sure. So predominantly financial services. From school to and still in financial services today. We built and bought and sold a business to MBNA in 2005 for a 9-figure sum. Whilst I was, you know, very, very minor, I was just a director of that business. I wasn't a shareholder, but that was a good learning curve for seeing how businesses work and how businesses do. At that stage, I was voted in the top 50 UK most influential marketers because I had the role of marketing director within that business. The guy that did own the bulk of the shares in the finance company then went on and bought Wycombe Wanderers Football Club and London Wasps Rugby Club. And I worked there for 6 years doing marketing, sponsorship, looking after the football team. So there was a good background into sports marketing, sports sponsorship and that kind of thing. And then 7 years ago, I set up a finance company, and that's what I do today. So yeah, that's my background.
Clearly, you know, as you said, you've been a company director. I don't know whether most people realise, but I've looked it up. John Curran introduced me into company law, just a Muggins guide to the kind of things that a director, company director, the responsibilities they have. If we look at the setup, and it's a subject we brought up on this Zoom previously. If we look up at the setup of GBGB, could you, in conscience, be a director? Or would you struggle to be a director, given what I've described as a potential conflict of interest? I mean, would that present a problem?
So I think around that, it's Yes, it would present a problem in the respect of, as Patrick said earlier on with the track draws, nobody's suggesting that anything goes on, but the fact that you can't see them and it's not transparent, it sets hairs, racing, and you think to yourself, why can I not see that track draw? Why is this not transparent? And in many respects, it's the same as the director's situation with the GBGB. I'm so far removed from it, I couldn't possibly suggest there was any hint of impropriety going on, but the fact that it's not transparent suggests that there could be. And that, as you referred to the point around conflicts of interest, what's clear within company law is that if you're if there's a potential conflict of interest, that's something you need to declare. Now, when Mark Bird wrote a column, I don't know, we say within the last year in the Racing Post, he said that he had declared a conflict of interest to the chairman, and the chairman, they'd had a vote or they discussed it and decided there wasn't a conflict of interest. But from the outside looking in, you have to think, how can there not be a conflict of interest when, for example, the Open Race Committee is made up of 2 promoters and Mr. Bird? So in that situation, those 2 promoters can outvote him. So if Toaster want to put a competition through and it doesn't fit in with those other promoters that are ultimately making the decision, surely they can veto that and they can just vote and say, no, we don't go with that. And so therefore, straight away, the competition's at a disadvantage. And for me, that's the very definition of a conflict of interest. And I don't understand how, as directors, they could get comfortable with the fact there was no conflict of interest.
Yeah, obviously from where we started and from where the board started, Mark Bird wasn't the MD. He was involved in the regulatory side of the industry. Then he and Rachel Corden formed a relationship. Other things have developed. Most recently and significantly, Ian Smythe was appointed a director, albeit he'd been acting as, I think, a proxy director prior to the December elections of the RCPA. We have a series of events, one after the other, the most significant recent being the announcement of a business contractual relationship between ARC and Entain, which means that even what was a particular dynamic, I don't know, a year ago, is now in a different place. Do you accept that some of this stuff hasn't necessarily been done deliberately, but that there is a chipping away at various factors that have altered during that period of time?
Absolutely. And you've seen in other sports that they're driven by profit. And so where the opportunity for further profit comes along, businesses take that, and that makes sense, and you can understand it. I suppose I come from the position as an owner in this instance, and I look at it and say, where does that leave the future for greyhound racing? Because, as Patrick said, you often see tracks get to the point where the kennel strength is good enough, so they put the opens to one side, and that makes it very difficult to plan. So do we end up with a situation in the future where opens aren't needed? They've reduced dramatically over the last 2, 3, 4 years. Do we get to a point where they're not needed still further? Do we get to the point where trainers end up breeding their own litters, or promoters provide the dogs to the trainers because there's just not the breeding going on anymore, because there's not the money, because people don't spend the money on the top dogs because they can't justify spending it because they're running for $3,000. The things will change and are changing. I think some clarity would be good. And if that's the route we're going down, let's be transparent about it. Greyhound racing makes a lot of people a lot of money, and it's well regulated from a compliance point of view. So it's not like it's going to stop. But if the business model's changing, let's be honest, we've seen in other sports breakaways where one group are going in one direction, one group going in another direction, and so it's easier to separate. If that's the case here, and the ARC, Entain, GBGB model is becoming a graded model, let's just acknowledge that and move on. And if there's demand for an open race model, let's create one.
Do you think that this will lead, given the as I said, the relationship between ARC and Entain, and the relationship and the I don't know, in some cases employment and contractual I don't know, soup within GBGB in terms of even the other directors, including some of the independent directors, do you not think, unless things change, it will lead to a breakaway whereby the SIS sector of the industry will not feel adequately represented?
I think there's a real danger of it if things don't change. And one of the things that we see with the GBGB is that they will go back to the fact they've done a good job with welfare, and that was something that needed dealing with because of the amount of anti-greyhound racing people that were bringing that to the fore, and it made it hard to get sponsors and it made it hard for the business to be commercial. But that's kind of been done and is being well maintained. So I don't think we can rest on our laurels anymore and say, but they do a good job with welfare. Great, they do a good job with welfare. That's kind of now given. And whilst it shouldn't be forgotten and it should be applauded, it should be now saying, okay, more than regulate, how are you going to promote? And let's understand how we drive the business. And it is a business, how we drive it forward for all the stakeholders, breeders, owners, trainers. There's enough money in the sport for everybody to do reasonably well. But at the moment, it's the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So how do we address that? And I think that's going to be crucial over the next few months.
And from a commercial perspective, which I've always argued is the weakness of the board, not the regulation aspect and the welfare side, but it's the commercial. Because when you have companies represented like ARC, or if it was SIS, and it could be SIS, it could be, we could be in a different scenario now, and it would be, but the same problem would exist. How do you offset the personal, or not personal, the corporate ambitions of companies like that with, as you said, the remainder of the industry? Because there may well be issues going ahead where SIS, or had they been represented, or ARC or Entain would go, it doesn't really suit our commercial model, our commercial vision for that to happen. But people like yourself as an owner, or Patrick as a trainer, we're going, but we're desperate for that. How, from a commercial, can you see any way that anybody can make a reasonable impression from a commercial perspective within the board?
I think that the way that the board is constructed, as I understand it, makes it very difficult, because we're going back round to the almost full circle around the conflicts of interest. Businesses that sit on the board and the people that sit on the board that represent those businesses have to have their own agenda, which takes into account their own business. So are they looking at the greater good, or are they looking at the impact of a decision on their business? And it'd be very, very hard not to look at the impact of a decision on their business and just look at the greater good. So I think that the way that the makeup of the board at the moment and the way that it's structured doesn't drive those decisions in the way that make greyhound racing commercially viable for everybody.